At a star-studded charity gala, Keanu Reeves quietly asked to sit in the back, away from cameras, away from fame. No one understood why, but by the end of the night, the people at the front would never forget the man they overlooked and the one act that changed everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lobby shimmered with wealth. Polished marble reflected heels and tuxedo shoes, and soft jazz floated from a grand piano tucked beside a glittering champagne tower. The Beverly Palace Hotel had hosted its share of galas, but tonight's event was especially extravagant. A-list celebrities, political donors, tech billionaires, and philanthropic giants filled the space, each more camera-ready than the next. Smiles were posed, handshakes calculated, and every movement choreographed for social media perfection. But amidst the press, velvet ropes, and gold-trimmed programs, a single man entered quietly through the side door. Keanu Reeves didn't arrive with an entourage. He wasn't trailed by stylists or security. He walked in alone, wearing a soft charcoal suit that looked comfortable, not couture. His tie was modest, his expression calm. He paused at the entrance of the main ballroom and took in the scene without judgment, just observation. A young coordinator named Felicity approached him with a clipboard in hand and an excited smile that barely hid her nerves. "Mr. Reeves, welcome. We're so honored you could make it tonight. We have your seat ready, table 1, front and center, right next to the mayor." She gestured toward the front of the ballroom, where gleaming name cards and champagne flutes marked the long table reserved for VIPs. Cameras were already positioned there. That table was made for publicity. Keanu looked at her, kind but firm. "Would it be all right if I sat somewhere quieter?" Felicity blinked. "Sir? You're listed as one of the honorary guests." "I know," he said softly, "but I'd rather sit in the back, if that's all right." She hesitated, unsure if she was even allowed to agree. "The back?" "Yes. Maybe somewhere near the wall, where I won't block anyone's view." There was no edge to his voice, just calm sincerity. Felicity glanced over her shoulder toward the stage, where a PR manager was directing floral arrangements. Then back at Keanu. "Okay," she said quietly. "Follow me." They walked together down the edge of the ballroom, past photographers and murmuring donors. Heads turned. A few guests whispered. One man chuckled behind a wine glass. "Did Reeves lose his table?" a voice asked. "No, probably just doesn't want to deal with all the attention," said another. Half amused, half dismissive. As Felicity pulled out a chair near the very back of the room, behind a tall floral column partially blocking the view of the stage, Keanu smiled gently and nodded. "This is perfect." She nodded, still confused, and walked away. Keanu sat down, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, then folded his hands loosely in his lap. All around him, the room buzzed. Hosts made speeches, donors clinked glasses, and lights flashed near the front tables as celebrities posed for photos. But in the shadow of that oversized flower arrangement, Keanu Reeves sat alone, unnoticed, simply observing the night unfold, not as its centerpiece, but as its witness. From his seat in the shadows, Keanu watched the night take shape. The ballroom buzzed with familiar rhythms, elegant laughter, carefully measured small talk, applause at precisely the right moments. Waitstaff floated between tables like dancers, balancing trays of truffle hors d'oeuvres and imported wine. At the center stage, a tech entrepreneur delivered a short speech about generosity. Words like impact and legacy echoed beneath the chandeliers. Keanu didn't clap, not because he disagreed, but because he had learned the difference between applause and approval, and sometimes silence said more. At his table, table 41, no one else sat. It was technically an overflow table, added last minute when RSVPs exceeded expectations. Folding chairs instead of padded ones. No name cards. A small candle flickering beside a stack of untouched event programs He leaned back slightly, content. A waiter approached to pour him a glass of sparkling water and hesitated. "Sir, are you supposed to be here?" Keanu smiled and nodded. "Yes, thank you." The waiter glanced toward the front, then back at him, unsure whether to offer the shrimp tart or the filet bites. Keanu took neither, just a polite nod of gratitude. Not far from him, an influencer in a sequined gown stared over her shoulder and whispered something to her partner. They both looked back at Keanu, trying to gauge whether his placement was intentional or a mistake. The truth was, it didn't matter to him. He didn't come for attention, and he didn't come for spectacle. He came because someone he once loved had volunteered at this very charity years ago. A woman who used to say, "True kindness is what you do when no one's watching." She was gone now, but tonight her memory sat with him. On stage, a celebrity auction began. The host, a booming, energetic man in a velvet blazer, held up signed memorabilia and luxury getaways, each met with roars of competitive bidding. "All proceeds go to expanding pediatric cancer programs across the state," he shouted. "Come on, folks. Let's change lives." Laughter, cheers, champagne flutes raised. Keanu watched, silent, still. A large man in a tuxedo at a nearby table leaned over to his date and muttered, "What's Reeves even doing here if he's not going to bid?" She shrugged. "Maybe he's just trying to stay relevant." The comment wasn't meant to be cruel, just careless, and Keanu didn't hear it. But if he had, he wouldn't have responded. His focus was elsewhere. A young busboy, no older than 20, moved nervously past the row of tables with an empty tray. His hands shook slightly. When he passed Keanu's table, their eyes met. Keanu gave him a small nod. It was barely noticeable. But the boy straightened his shoulders after that. Back at the main table, flashbulbs exploded again as the mayor posed with a pop singer. Felicity glanced back toward table 41, watching Keanu still seated alone. She couldn't explain it, but something about him back there made the whole room feel different. As the dinner progressed, more guests arrived, fashionably late, each one ushered toward the spotlight that Keanu had quietly stepped away from. A journalist briefly scanned the room with her tablet, marking names and noting which celebrities had arrived. When she saw Keanu in the back, she frowned. "He's not at the front?" "Oh," her photographer whispered. "Refused the seat." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. No headline there, at least not yet. The auction continued with loud declarations and laughter until it came time for the Kindness in Action tribute segment. A short film played, showcasing past volunteers, children in hospitals, and stories of impact. The room dimmed. Attention finally focused. On screen, a young woman named April told the story of her mother's battle with leukemia. She spoke about loneliness in hospital hallways, about how one stranger sat with her mother every Tuesday for 3 months, just reading aloud. No cameras, no attention. The final image in the video was of her mother's hospital bedside. A book of poetry lay on the table. A hand rested beside it, gentle, steady, unmistakably his. Someone in the audience gasped. A ripple moved through the crowd. Keanu said nothing. He didn't flinch. He kept watching, his eyes soft. The lights rose again. The host took the stage with a grin, oblivious to the changed energy in the room. "Wasn't that something?" he said. "Now, let's raise some real money." Applause returned, but it felt different. More forced now. More mechanical. Back at the VIP table, the mayor leaned in to whisper to a producer. Why wasn't Keanu included in the thank you list? The producer hesitated. He didn't want to be. The mayor shook his head. That's insane. At table 41, Keanu quietly reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. A child's drawing, a son with a smile, and in blocky handwriting, "Thank you for sitting with my mom." He stared at it for a moment, then placed it beneath his water glass. A staff member hurried toward him with a fresh plate of food. "Mr. Reeves, we've updated your seat. VIP table has a spot now." Keanu looked up gently. "I'm good here," he said. The staff member paused, then slowly backed away. Behind the floral column, Keanu returned to watching. Not in judgment, not in distance, just presence. From time to time, someone would glance his way, then look back to the stage. Most still didn't realize he was even there, but the few who did began to notice something they hadn't before. The people with the cameras weren't the ones making the difference tonight. The ones at the front weren't the ones being remembered. And sometimes, the loudest voice in the room was silent. The grand ballroom shimmered as orchestral strings swelled through the sound system. Spotlights swept across the glossy floor, illuminating every curve of the stage and every jeweled gown in the front rows. The host's booming voice introduced the night's theme, Shaping Tomorrow Through Generosity, followed by a standing ovation that felt rehearsed, if not rehearsed literally. Cameras panned across the front tables, capturing polished smiles and designer suits. Red carpet royalty clinked glasses, posing, laughing, eyes darting for other lenses. It was spectacle at its peak, perfection curated in real time. Screens above the stage flashed with highlights of the sponsors and major donors. Keanu's name didn't appear. Not once. Near the front, seated just 2 rows from the stage, a rising influencer in a champagne-toned dress flipped her hair and checked her phone. Her name was Ember Jade. With over 8 million followers, she had already posted 4 Instagram stories about the evening. In one of them, she captioned a selfie with, "Manifesting kindness, even when the pasta is mid." She turned to the guest beside her, a well-known comedian. "Can you believe Reeves asked to sit in the back?" The comedian scoffed. "That guy's always been weird, doesn't play the game." Ember giggled. "It's like, does he want people to think he's deep?" Behind them, a former Oscar nominee who hadn't worked in 5 years raised an eyebrow at the exchange but stayed silent. There was something about Keanu that made even cynics pause. But not always out loud. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the air was heavier. In the narrow corridor just beyond the ballroom's main doors, servers weaved through with trays of appetizers, wine glasses, and desserts balanced with practiced grace. Except for one. Luis, a 19-year-old busboy on his 3rd shift, stepped wrong. A tray of champagne glasses slipped from his grip and crashed spectacularly onto the floor, sending shards and bubbles flying in all directions. The sound cut briefly through the gala's grandeur. Heads turned. A floor manager stormed over, her heels clicking with fury. "What are you doing?" she hissed, grabbing Luis by the elbow. "Do you even know how expensive this event is?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, Sorry doesn't clean crystal," she snapped. "Get a broom and go around. Now. You're lucky you're not fired." Luis blinked quickly, nodding, trying not to cry. From behind the column near the back of the ballroom, Keanu watched the whole thing. He stood quietly. No one noticed at first. No spotlight followed. No music cued a shift. He simply moved with purpose. He made his way through the outer tables, dodging the edge of a cameraman's tripod, and walked past guests too busy adjusting their cufflinks to look up. By the time he reached Luis, the young man was already crouched on the floor trying to collect the glass shards with a napkin. Keanu knelt beside him without a word. He picked up the base of a broken flute, examined it, then handed it gently to Luis. The boy's eyes widened. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu smiled. "Looks like we both missed dinner." Luis tried to stammer out an apology, but Keanu waved it off with quiet reassurance. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. They gathered the broken stems together, and when Luis stood to toss them in the bin, Keanu followed him out of the main hall without a second thought. In the service hallway, staff passed by in a flurry of controlled chaos. Trays were reloaded, plates were swapped, wine glasses clinked as they were placed back into polished racks. Yet for a moment, the noise dulled as servers noticed who was walking beside the kid from Glendale High School who had spilled the drinks. Luis ducked his head. "I'm probably getting fired." Keanu shook his head. You made a mistake, not a statement. Luis looked at him sideways. But people saw it. The manager. Doesn't mean she saw you, Keanu said gently. The words landed harder than Luis expected. His chest tightened, but not from embarrassment, from the strange sensation of being seen for the first time all night. One of the older chefs, a man with deep lines around his mouth and a patch on his sleeve that read Marco, gave a slight nod as they passed. Hey, Reeves, he said. Still picking up after Hollywood, huh? Keanu smiled at him. Old habits. They walked past a prep station lined with carrot sticks and tiny cups of saffron dip. Keanu paused, picked one up, and handed it to Louise. You haven't eaten. Louise hesitated, then took it with a quiet, thanks. Back in the ballroom, the gala continued with its preset rhythm. A celebrity auctioneer was now on stage, offering a private yacht vacation with a famous pop star. The bids soared, champagne flowed, and applause roared for every pledge made. None of it reached the back hallway where Keanu stood beside a boy who didn't belong. A junior assistant finally found Keanu near the supply closet and jogged over, breathless. Sir, I'm so sorry. They're about to start the tribute video. You were supposed to be up front for the acknowledgement. Keanu looked down at his hands, still slightly sticky from handling broken glass. He wiped them gently on a towel Louise handed him, then turned to the assistant. I'm fine right here. But sir, your name's on the next slide. That's okay. The assistant hesitated. Do you want me to? Just tell them I'm watching, Keanu said. She blinked, uncertain, then nodded and left. As Louise leaned against the wall beside him, he whispered, You really don't care about being up there? Keanu turned his head slowly. It's not about being seen. It's about seeing. Louise stared at him, confused, but deeply moved. He didn't fully understand what Keanu meant, not yet. But it felt true, and for the first time all evening, he didn't feel like a background prop in someone else's production. Meanwhile, the tribute video inside the ballroom played on, filled with fast-cut montages of celebrity appearances and donation tallies. Laughter and gasps echoed as familiar faces filled the screen. Some speaking from yachts, others from red carpets. A booming voiceover praised visionaries, legends, and selfless givers. Keanu's image appeared only once, barely, a still photo from a community kitchen fundraiser 5 years ago. No speech, no selfie, just him stirring a pot beside an elderly volunteer with no caption. It lasted half a second. Few noticed, but one person did. Across the ballroom, seated at a table decorated with towering crystal centerpieces, a woman named Mira Patel leaned forward. A longtime social worker and first-time attendee, she had felt out of place all evening. The gowns glittered, but the air had felt cold. She had tried to network, but found herself talking to walls with names. Yet when she saw that fleeting image of Keanu in the kitchen, she felt something stir. It wasn't the image that caught her. It was the fact that he wasn't trying to be seen. And yet the moment felt more real than anything else all night. She stood from her table despite the ongoing applause and glanced toward the back of the room. There he was, just barely visible behind the floral column, standing now beside a nervous-looking young man in a black apron. The contrast was startling. The stage glowed. That corner didn't. But it felt warmer. She didn't return to her seat. Backstage, the event manager fumed quietly as she noticed Keanu was still not in the VIP spotlight. She whispered into her headset, "Why is he back there? He's part of the tribute." "Refused seating," someone responded. "Said he wanted the back." The manager rolled her eyes. "Always has to be different." But in the kitchen hallway, Luis checked the time and realized his break was long over. "I should probably get back," he said, already bracing for another scolding. Keanu nodded. "You did fine." Luis hesitated. "I don't get it. You're famous. Why sit with me?" Keanu looked him square in the eyes. "Because tonight, you needed someone to." Luis blinked fast and without another word disappeared into the kitchen. Keanu returned to his table, the one behind the flowers, partially obscured from the stage, partially removed from the spotlight. He sat down just as the next speaker took the stage. Another billionaire. Another pre-written speech. Another burst of applause. But the applause felt thinner now, less convinced. And somewhere in the crowd, Mira sat at the edge of her seat, not looking at the stage, but at the quiet man in the back. She didn't know him, but something told her he saw her too. The table where Keanu sat was nearly an afterthought. Nestled behind a towering floral column near the kitchen doors, it had been reserved for overflow guests who didn't quite fit into the designer map of celebrity seating. No camera cranes reached this far, no red carpet names, just a mix of quiet people, each with their own reason for being there, and none expecting to be remembered. To Keanu's left sat an elderly woman with kind eyes and a small oxygen tank beside her. Her hands were fragile but folded gracefully in her lap. Her name tag read, Helen G., Honored Volunteer. She had given 30 years of service to a local children's shelter, and a social worker had nominated her for a free ticket. To his right was a man in janitor blues, his hair slicked awkwardly, as if he wasn't sure whether this was a formal event or just another mess he'd be asked to clean up. His name was Theo. He had won 2 seats in a staff raffle, but came alone. "My brother couldn't make it," he muttered when Keanu gently introduced himself. Across the table sat a girl who looked about 16, shoulders hunched, arms crossed tightly in front of her. Her dress shimmered in a way that felt borrowed. Her name tag said, Lily, Youth Performer. Her violin case rested beside her chair like a shield. None of them realized who Keanu was, not really. Helen asked, "And what brings you here, dear?" Keanu smiled. "Support." She nodded, thinking nothing more of it. Theo took a sip of his water, watching the room full of glitz and glamour, as if trying to decide if any of it was real. Lily fidgeted with the clasp of her case, biting her lip so hard it turned white. "You're playing tonight?" Keanu asked her gently. Lily looked up, startled that anyone noticed. "Yeah, just one piece, but it's nothing big." "Does it matter if it's big?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. She didn't answer. "I messed up in rehearsal," she said after a pause. "My fingers locked. I couldn't even finish." Keanu nodded, listening. "I'm not even sure why they picked me," she whispered. Keanu leaned slightly closer. "The world doesn't need perfect," he said, his voice almost too quiet to hear. "Just true." Lily blinked hard. The words didn't erase the fear, but something inside her shifted, just enough. Across the ballroom, a server glanced toward the table and did a double take. "Hey," she whispered to a staffer near the backstage curtain. "Is that Keanu Reeves at table 48? The staffer frowned. "What? No. He's supposed to be front and center." They both craned their necks, confirming it. Backstage, the assistant event director received the news and sighed. "He's still back there," she muttered. "We'll fix it at intermission." She didn't know that, by then, the whole room would already be different. The buzz behind the scenes grew louder as the realization spread. The producers were already on edge from managing egos, lighting issues, and last-minute program shuffles. Now they had a VIP sitting in the shadows, and not just any VIP. Keanu Reeves, a man whose name still held quiet gravity, even among people obsessed with headlines. "Why is he back there?" one of the coordinators whispered, clutching her clipboard as if it could somehow hold the answer. "Hell asked to sit in the back," replied the intern who'd guided him in. The coordinator blinked. He asked. "Yeah," said he preferred it. That sentence circulated like smoke through the staff corridors. Some rolled their eyes, others looked troubled. In a world where everyone fought to be seen, a man of global fame had chosen to be invisible. It didn't fit the narrative. Back at table 48, Keanu was exactly where he wanted to be. Helen had started sharing stories of the children she used to help. Theo had begun to relax, cracking a small smile when Helen described a boy who used to sneak extra cookies into his backpack for his imaginary siblings. Keanu listened without checking his phone. He laughed gently when Theo admitted he'd nearly missed the gala because he thought the ticket was a scam. He passed Lily a glass of water without being asked when he noticed her breathing quicken. Around them, the clinking of crystal and the hum of stage lights filled the space, but it didn't invade their table. Somehow, their corner had become its own small world. Lily looked up from her lap and asked Helen, "What made you stay so long? 30 years helping kids." Helen's eyes softened. "They were the ones who stayed with me." No fanfare followed her words, just quiet. Keanu nodded, absorbing them. Across the room, a camera operator focused on the main table, where a celebrity couple posed with exaggerated smiles. They laughed on cue. Toasted with flourish, their moment would be clipped and shared across entertainment blogs within the hour. But at the forgotten table, there was no performance, only people. A soft chime rang from the stage. The MC's voice echoed through the ballroom, signaling the next portion of the evening. A charity founder was set to speak. Lights dimmed as attention shifted toward the front. Backstage, a producer leaned into a walkie-talkie. "We're going to move Reeves at the break. Put him next to the mayor." Another voice replied, "Won't that look weird?" "Not as weird as having him sit behind the floral arrangements all night." They missed the point entirely. At table 48, Keanu looked around as the room stilled. He caught Lily's nervous glance again, and this time he didn't offer advice, just presence. She nodded just once, as if something inside her had steadied. He returned the gesture, an unspoken pact between two people who understood that courage often lives in quiet corners. As the gala proceeded, the host's voice boomed across the ballroom. Big names were introduced, donations were announced, applause swelled in all the right places. But at table 48, the noise didn't quite reach. Lily leaned toward Keanu. "You really don't mind being back here?" He looked over and smiled, the kind that didn't need translation. "It's not about where you sit, it's about who you sit with." Helen chuckled softly, her hand brushing against the oxygen tank. "If only someone had told me that at 20. Theo added, "If someone had told me that last week, I might have skipped the panic attack I had buying a jacket for this." The table shared a warm laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was real. From a distance, a photographer raised his camera. His lens swept across the room in search of glamour. For a moment, it passed over Keanu's table and paused. Something about the scene caught his eye. The way they leaned into each other, the unforced expressions. He snapped a photo, then hesitated before moving on. He couldn't quite explain why. Backstage, a coordinator checked her tablet. "Intermission in 15. Let's make the move then." Another assistant asked, "What if he doesn't want to go?" "We'll make it look natural, just smile and escort him." But Keanu already sensed the shift. It was in the way one of the event planners kept glancing over. The sudden attention had a temperature. Lily noticed too and grew tense. "Are they going to move you?" Keanu replied calmly, "They might try." Theo shifted. "Would you go?" Keanu paused. "Only if it meant honoring this table." That answer didn't seem to match the world they lived in, but it matched the man sitting before them. Suddenly, the violinist MC returned to the stage, announcing the young performers scheduled for the night. Lily's name was called. She was up next, after the break. Her face paled. Keanu leaned in gently. "You don't have to be loud. You just have to be real." She nodded. Her fingers trembled, but she was standing straighter. Helen offered, "Want me to hold your coat?" Theo gave her a half grin. "Break a string, that's good luck, right?" Keanu said nothing more. He just rested his hand on the edge of the table where she had steadied herself. The moment passed between them like a signal. Around them, the gala carried on, unaware that something sacred had taken root at its forgotten edge. The music faded and the host thanked donors. Lights shifted once more. But at table 48 something was changing, not because of cameras or headlines, but because one person had chosen presence over position, connection over celebrity. And that choice, simple, quiet, and almost invisible, was beginning to echo beyond the edges of the tablecloth. The sound of applause swelled like a sudden wave crashing through the ballroom. Conversations dimmed, chairs swiveled, eyes turned toward the grand entrance of the hall. A spotlight caught her just as she stepped onto the deep blue carpet. Ellen DeGeneres had arrived. She wore a sleek white blazer, her signature sneakers, and a sharp grin that walked the line between charm and command. A camera crew shadowed her as if it were choreography. Behind her, flashes exploded like celebratory fireworks. Some guests stood instinctively, others clapped with a kind of dutiful respect. Ellen paused, gave a wave that seemed both playful and practiced, then strolled deeper into the room like she belonged to the center of it. She didn't notice the man sitting at the far back of the hall. Her eyes never drifted beyond the first 10 tables. She was too busy greeting familiar faces. Actors, influencers, CEOs, gala veterans who exchanged cheek kisses and inside jokes. The production team swept behind her, positioning lights, prepping microphones. Meanwhile, at table 48, Keanu remained seated. He didn't rise. He didn't need to. The host of the evening, a man in a silver tuxedo with a mic clipped to his lapel, spotted Ellen and beamed. And now, we're joined by the one and only Ellen DeGeneres, comedian, humanitarian, and tonight's special guest. The room cheered again. Ellen laughed modestly and took her place near the front with the other A-listers. A velvet chair was pulled out for her. She slid into it with casual ease. Just off stage, a young interviewer held a handheld mic and signaled that they were live streaming this portion. "Ellen, it's such an honor to have you with us tonight," she said cheerfully. "What are you hoping to see this evening?" Ellen looked into the camera with a twinkle. "Well," she started, smoothing her lapel, "I hope we see some real generosity from those who usually hide in the shadows." The line was meant to land like a punchline. It did. Laughter broke across the nearest tables. The camera panned slowly to capture the reaction of the front rows. Smiling faces, glasses raised. Nobody thought twice. Nobody except Keanu. He had heard every word. From his seat in the back, behind a floral arrangement that still blocked half his view of the stage, Keanu's gaze didn't shift. His body didn't move. But there was a change. A quiet tightening in his expression, the kind that went unnoticed unless you were watching closely. And at that table, someone was. Theo, the janitor with the quiet eyes, had seen the flicker pass through Keanu's face like a cloud over calm water. "Was she talking about you?" he asked gently. Keanu didn't respond, not right away. He looked down at his hands, resting open on the tablecloth. Then, softly, "She doesn't know I'm here." Theo nodded slowly, as if understanding something unspoken. The table around them had gone quiet. The elderly woman, her oxygen tank softly humming, leaned in slightly as though trying to hear better. The teenage violinist glanced from Keanu to the front of the room and back again. "You're not going to say anything?" she whispered. Keanu gave a small smile. "What would I say that hasn't already been shouted louder by others?" The violinist tilted her head. "I don't think silence means nothing." "No," Keanu said. "Sometimes it's the only honest thing left." At the front, Ellen had begun a small stage interview with the event host. The conversation veered toward philanthropy and fame, all under bright lights and polished delivery. The room hung on every word. But in the back, at table 48, something else was taking place. Something slower, quieter, but more meaningful. A kind of stillness had formed around Keanu and the misfit group at his table. They weren't watching the lights. They were watching each other. The teenage violinist, Ava, was still clutching her program, folded tightly in her lap. She looked at Keanu again, her voice tentative. "I'm supposed to play soon. I'm terrified." Keanu turned toward her fully, his attention undivided. "Why?" "I don't know. Everyone's so polished here. Perfect. I don't belong." He leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice as if speaking only to her. "You don't have to belong. You just have to be true. That's all they'll remember." He swallowed, nodding, as if trying to anchor herself to the words. From the stage, applause broke out. Ellen had finished her interview, her laughter ringing across the ballroom like a bell. She waved again to the cameras, completely unaware of the exchange unfolding quietly behind her. Backstage, near the sound booth, a junior organizer was pacing. "Why is Reeves still back there?" she hissed into her earpiece. A coordinator on the other end replied, "He asked to be seated in the back." "Didn't want VIP?" The organizer's brows furrowed. "We can't have the press thinking we're sidelining him. Fix it at intermission, move him up." "Fine, understood," came the reply. They didn't realize that Keanu had already reshaped the evening without moving a single seat. He wasn't there for the headlines. He wasn't there for the camera pans or the applause cues. He was there for the space in between. The moments no one rehearsed. Back at the table, Theo quietly pushed a glass of water toward the elderly woman beside him, who'd begun coughing softly. She gave him a thankful glance. Ava breathed in and out, practicing the rhythm Keanu had taught her. And Keanu? He simply folded his hands and waited. As the MC introduced the next speaker, a wave of camera shutters echoed through the hall. The lights shifted subtly, bathing the stage in golden hues. Ellen moved to her assigned table at the front, sitting beside industry executives and well-known philanthropists. Laughter surrounded her, soft and curated. At table 48, the laughter didn't reach. But something more profound did. The janitor, Carl, glanced at his watch. "They'll be starting the scholarship raffle soon. Probably forget we're back here." Keanu's eyes didn't move from the stage. "Then we'll remember each other instead." Carl blinked, then let out a chuckle. You're a strange one." "Maybe," Keanu said softly. "But tonight, strange feels honest." As the stage lights pulsed again, Ellen took the microphone for a quick audience interaction segment. She was relaxed, comfortable in her domain. "I see so many incredible people here tonight," she beamed. "Some who do their giving with the cameras off. Some who wait for the spotlight." Laughter. Then she looked directly at the lens. "But I'm most excited to see who surprises us tonight. Maybe even someone sitting in the shadows." That word, shadows, rippled through Keanu's table like a distant tremor. He glanced toward the front. Ellen still hadn't noticed him. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She simply didn't expect anyone important to sit back there. Ava's hand trembled slightly. Carl leaned forward, whispering, "Did she mean you?" Keanu didn't respond. He simply looked down at the linen napkin folded neatly in his lap. His fingers brushed the edge. "I think she meant anyone," he finally said. "And that means all of us." Ava inhaled sharply. "Do you think I'll still be allowed to play?" "Of course," Keanu said. "But they don't feel like I fit what they expect." He looked at her and said with quiet weight, "Then give them something they didn't expect." At that moment, the house lights dimmed for intermission. Conversations picked up, and the flow of people resumed toward the bar and lobby. Backstage, an assistant gestured urgently to a producer. "We still have time to shift Reeves to the front." But the producer hesitated. "He doesn't want it." The assistant frowned. "Since when do we let the guests decide where they sit?" A more senior voice interjected. "Since he made everyone back there feel more seen than our whole camera crew ever could." At table 48, Keanu rose briefly to stretch. He didn't move forward. He didn't walk backstage. He simply helped Carl steady the elderly woman's chair and offered her a blanket from a nearby stack. When the show resumed, nothing seemed different on the surface, but the room itself had begun to turn. The ballroom shimmered under gold-toned chandeliers as the next phase of the gala began, the charity auction. It was the kind of spectacle that blurred the line between generosity and performance. A tuxedoed MC strutted on stage with exaggerated flair, announcing each item like it was the Holy Grail. Guests clapped with just enough enthusiasm to be seen, but not enough to look desperate. Their masks were flawless. The bidding opened with a luxury spa package, 7 nights at a private wellness resort in Aspen. Within seconds, hands shot up. A socialite from Palm Springs shouted her bid over the hum of clinking glasses. A tech CEO in designer sneakers raised her by 10 grand just for the thrill. The auctioneer smiled wider. This wasn't about charity anymore, it was theater. Keanu sat quietly at the back of the room, his table untouched by the glitter. His gaze wasn't on the stage. It lingered near the side entrance, where a teenage girl paced nervously with a violin case pressed to her chest. Her name was Sophie. She hadn't spoken much since she arrived. Her seat at the forgotten table had been a gift from her guidance counselor, a chance to be seen, they had said. But now, with the moment closing in, she felt smaller than ever. Sophie slipped away from her seat unnoticed and walked backstage, breathing shallowly. The velvet curtain looked like a wall she'd never climb. Her fingers trembled around the bow. She wasn't sure if she'd play or freeze. Then she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Keanu standing there. Not close, just near enough to be real. No cameras followed, no handlers hovered. He carried nothing, said nothing at first. He simply stood with her, sharing the silence. Sophie blinked rapidly. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Keanu looked at her, eyes steady but kind. When my sister was sick, he said quietly. Music helped her breathe when nothing else could. She didn't care about perfection, just that the notes were honest. Sophie looked down at her violin, her reflection warped in the polished wood. He continued, "Play for someone you love. That's all that matters." The hallway held its breath. Sophie swallowed hard. Her shoulders relaxed a little. It was the first moment of peace she'd felt all evening. She didn't smile with her mouth, but something inside her loosened, like a knot that had been clenched too long. The stagehand called her name gently. It was time. Keanu gave her a small nod and stepped aside. No pep talk, no grand gesture, just presence. The spotlight on stage dimmed, then rose slowly as Sophie stepped out from behind the curtain. The crowd stirred with idle curiosity. Most of them had forgotten there was a performance scheduled. A few tilted their heads, squinting past their champagne flutes. She walked to center stage and paused. The microphone wasn't needed. Her music would do the speaking. She adjusted her posture. The lights were too warm. Her palms were damp. Her chest felt hollow. In the back of the room, Keanu sat still. Then the first note rang out. It was shaky, tentative, like a voice clearing its throat. A few guests chuckled softly. Anxious laughter, the kind that fills spaces where silence should stay. But Sophie didn't stop. The second note came stronger. Then a third, longer, richer, more certain. Her bow flowed across the strings like water threading through stone. The hall began to hush. Glasses stilled. Phones lowered. Conversations faltered. Even the MC leaned back in his chair, watching with unexpected interest. Sophie played a piece she had written herself. Something simple, something raw. It had no name, no history, but it was full of someone. The notes carried a weight that had nothing to do with fame or skill. Keanu could hear it. He leaned forward just slightly, elbows on knees, head tilted. Behind him, even the servers paused. A woman in a sequined dress blinked fast and clutched her clutch a little tighter. The music climbed, not in volume but in meaning. Every measure whispered vulnerability. Every transition echoed something unspoken. And in that vast, opulent room, something rare happened. Stillness fell. Not silence, stillness. The kind where souls hold each other gently. When Sophie's last note lingered in the air, the entire room stayed frozen for one long beat. No one clapped at first, not out of indifference, but reverence. It was as if the crowd feared breaking something sacred. Then came the first applause. Then another, and another. It was slow, uneven, honest. Sophie bowed with trembling shoulders and left the stage before anyone could ask her name. She disappeared behind the curtain like a whisper folding into night. Backstage, her breathing came fast. She gripped the neck of her violin tightly, not in fear now, but in astonishment that she had made it through. Keanu was there. He said nothing, just offered her his hand. She took it. From across the room, the producers watched, confused. "Who was that girl?" one of them asked. "Why didn't anyone tell us Keanu Reeves was involved in her segment?" Another shrugged. "He's not on the performance list." "That can't be right." They flipped through the program again. No mention, no credits, no PR stunt, but it didn't make sense. But for Sophie, it didn't need to. She walked back to the table slowly, passing glittering heels, velvet tuxedos, and designer bags without looking up. And when she sat back down next to the quiet actor, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Keanu gave her a soft nod. And for the first time all evening, she smiled without fear. The applause slowly faded as the auction resumed. But something had shifted. The atmosphere was thinner, like the room had been drained of its performance-driven energy, and something more human had taken its place. Still, the next item was announced. A diamond-studded luxury watch with a bidding start of $50,000. Laughter and excitement tried to swell again, but it sounded forced. Keanu quietly returned to his seat. The elderly woman next to him patted his hand and whispered, "She was wonderful. You did something, didn't you?" He smiled gently and said, "She did it all." At the front, a tech billionaire raised his paddle with mock flair. "65,000, he shouted, prompting a few chuckles. A fashion mogul raised it to 70. The MC clapped along. But his smile faltered every time he glanced toward the back of the room. Keanu looked around at the people at his table. The janitor had tears in his eyes. The woman on oxygen breathed a little slower, her gaze soft. And Sophie sat with her violin case resting beside her, hands folded neatly in her lap. No one at their table had bid on anything. No one wore anything worth more than a few $100s. But the moment they shared would outlast the entire evening. Backstage, a young event assistant pointed to the guest list and muttered, "Why is he back there? He's not even on camera." The producer waved her off. "Don't worry, we'll get him moved for the finale. The donors will want a photo." But they were too late. Because without knowing it, the most important part of the gala had already happened, and the people who mattered most had felt it. Not at the front, not in the spotlight, but in the forgotten row beneath a column of flowers, where kindness didn't need a lens to be seen. The lights dim slightly as the MC announces the next segment. Please welcome a very special young guest here through our Youth Arts Scholarship Program, Ms. Emily Chen. Scattered applause follows. A few guests glance up from their phones. Some continue murmuring over champagne. A man in a tuxedo makes a joke under his breath about kids and charity stunts. No one at the main tables seems to expect much. From behind the curtain, Emily steps out. She clutches her violin like a lifeline. Her black shoes shine under the spotlight, but her shoulders are tense and her steps hesitant. Her eyes scan the massive ballroom. Round tables with gold-plated name cards, towering floral centerpieces, and hundreds of eyes that seem not to notice her at all. She stands alone on a tiny platform in the middle of the stage, dwarfed by the glittering gala. The background orchestra begins to play, waiting for her cue. But Emily doesn't raise her bow right away. Her fingers tremble. Her breath catches in her throat. Then she sees him, way in the back, behind a column. Keanu Reeves sitting still, watching only her. Not talking, not eating, not filming, just present. She remembers what he told her backstage, that music once kept his sister company during chemo treatments, that sometimes playing for someone else was stronger than playing for applause. Play for someone you love, he'd said. She closes her eyes. The first note is soft, almost too soft. Then the next rises a little higher. A tremor in her wrist makes the vibrato waver, but she doesn't stop. The room doesn't quiet instantly. People continue chatting, unconcerned. But somewhere near the second phrase, something changes. A woman in a red dress stops mid-laugh. A man who had been checking his watch lowers his arm. Emily begins to pour herself into the song. It's not flawless. Her tone isn't the most polished. But it's raw, haunting, vulnerable. The hush begins to ripple outward like water. One table goes silent, then another. Forks are set down, phones slowly lowered. Even the MC in the wings stops whispering into his headset. From the back, Keanu leans slightly forward, eyes glassy. She plays a final passage, one that's meant to sound like a cry, and draws it out with a delicate slide that fades into silence. Her bow hovers mid-air. The strings stop vibrating. No music, no noise. The stillness is complete. Then, all at once, the room explodes into applause. But Emily doesn't beam. She doesn't bow. Her eyes are still fixed on the far corner of the room, where Keanu gives her the smallest nod. She knows who she played for. The applause rolls through the ballroom like a tidal wave. Guests rise from their seats, some clapping out of genuine awe, others swept up by the momentum of the moment. One woman near the center wipes her eyes. A man in a tailored white suit mutters, "Where do they find her?" As if discovering authenticity was an exotic accident. The MC returns to the stage with an energized smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, Emily Chen!" The spotlight stays fixed on her, but she doesn't move. Her fingers loosen their grip on the bow, arms still lowered. Her gaze hasn't shifted from the back row. She sees him stand. It's not dramatic. There's no spotlight on him. But his simple action feels louder than the ovation. Keanu places his hands together in quiet applause. 3 steady claps and nods again, full of meaning. No one else sees it. But to Emily, it feels louder than all the cheers in the room. Behind her, the curtain parts slightly, and a young stage manager gestures for her to step off. Emily takes a breath, nods politely to the audience, and walks off stage. In the wings, one of the producers pulls her aside. "You didn't mention you could play like that," he says, blinking in disbelief. "That was real." She gives a faint smile, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know I could until tonight." A staff member offers her a water bottle, but she sets it aside. Her hands are still shaking. Not from fear now, but from the rush of having spoken her truth through strings and silence. Meanwhile, back in the ballroom, murmurs circulate. A few VIP guests lean over their tables, curious. One executive from a record label whispers to a colleague, "We need to find out who coached her." There's emotion in that tone, marketable emotion. But another woman at Keanu's forgotten table, a retired librarian with a portable oxygen tank, leans back and says quietly, "That wasn't coached, that was lived." A busboy passing by pauses just long enough to nod in agreement. Keanu hasn't returned to his seat. He walks slowly toward the back entrance, out of the spotlight, moving between servers and guests too busy discussing auction items to notice him leave. In the hallway behind the stage, he pauses. Emily is there, her violin case half open, a tissue in her hand. "You stayed," she says softly. "I heard every note," he replies. She glances away, then back. "Was it okay?" Keanu tilts his head, considering. It wasn't okay. It was brave. That word lands in her chest like warmth. She blinks hard, then quickly wipes her eyes with the tissue. "Thank you," she says. Keanu nods once, then turns to go, pausing only to gently press a folded note into her hand. She waits until he's disappeared down the corridor before opening it. In careful handwriting are just 5 words: "Don't quit on your voice." Emily folds the note slowly, places it inside her violin case, beside her resin and cloth, and zips it shut like a promise. As Emily exits backstage to find her seat again, something feels different. She no longer dreads the silence. For the first time all evening, it's comforting. She walks past guests who nod at her now, some in recognition, others in quiet respect. But she's not looking for approval. Her eyes scan for the back corner. Keanu is gone. His chair, tucked beneath the table, sits undisturbed. The floral column beside it still blocks half the view of the stage, yet something about the space feels full. Emily sits down next to the janitor again. He leans over and says, "That was something special. You didn't just play, you told a story." She smiles. "He helped me remember who I was playing for." The elderly woman beside them presses her hand softly over Emily's. "That music healed something I didn't even know was broken," Emily whispers. Then, "I think I found the right notes." At the front of the room, the auction continues, oblivious to what just happened. The crowd bids on jewelry and beach vacations. A host holds up a luxury watch as the centerpiece. "Time is priceless," she jokes. But in the back, at table 37, the real value of time had already been shared. In a trembling solo, a quiet nod, and a handwritten note. And without cameras or applause, the most important moment of the night had already happened. It started with a ripple. One of the photographers near the center aisle had been checking his lens, scanning the room for new angles. Most of the night had been focused on the loudest tables, the front rows gleaming with diamonds, laughter, and expensive perfume. But then, something subtle caught his eye. Way in the back, beyond the last arch of lighting, was a man rising to his feet. His silhouette didn't scream for attention. It stood quietly, composed. And yet, there was something unmistakable in the way he moved, the grace in his stillness. The photographer leaned to his assistant and whispered, "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" The assistant's head snapped around so fast, she nearly knocked over her tablet. Her jaw dropped. She fumbled for her phone and zoomed in. "Oh my God, it is," she murmured, barely able to contain her breath. "He's been back there this whole time?" The word spread like a current in a shallow stream. At first, just a few heads turned, then a few more. By the time the violinist had taken her final bow backstage and the auctioneer had resumed calling out the next prize, the mood in the room had changed. People weren't looking at the stage anymore. They were looking backward. A well-known celebrity chef stopped mid-test and turned around. A political donor paused with a crystal glass in his hand. Even Ellen, seated in the middle row with a perfect view of the spotlight, sensed the shift in energy. She turned to her assistant and asked, "What's happening?" But the assistant wasn't answering. She too was staring at the back of the room. There he stood, Keanu Reeves, in a plain charcoal suit, no tie, collar unbuttoned, his hands calmly folded in front of him. The spotlight hadn't reached him, but the collective gaze of the room had. He didn't speak, didn't wave like a celebrity grandstanding for applause. He just smiled, nodded once, and remained exactly where he was. Still, grounded. For a brief moment, the noise of the gala faded. Conversations died mid-sentence. Clinking glasses paused in mid-air. A camera operator, unsure of protocol, hesitated before slowly panning toward the back, focusing in on the man no one had paid attention to. Until now. In the control booth, a producer's voice crackled nervously over the comms. "Do we cut to him? Do we zoom in?" The director answered with only one word. "Hold." Backstage, the young violinist stood frozen beside the curtain, clutching her bow like it was the only thing anchoring her. She had just poured her heart into the performance, something she never imagined she'd have the courage to do. Her hands still trembled from the adrenaline, her breath came in shallow pulls. But now, hearing the sudden hush fall over the crowd, she peeked through the side slit in the curtain and followed their gaze. Her eyes landed on the back of the ballroom. There he was, not clapping, not stepping into the light, just standing, quiet and unmoving, like a mountain that didn't need to shout its presence. The same man who had sat next to her, encouraged her, asked her name, told her that the world didn't need perfect, just true. Her heart fluttered, then dropped. She had no idea it had been him, the Keanu Reeves. The same one from all the headlines, the movies, the stories people whispered about in admiration. And yet, the way he had spoken to her had none of that weight. No ego, no expectation. He had listened to her as if she mattered, like she was the only voice in the room. Now he stood in silence, and the whole room listened. The violinist felt something warm press against her ribs. Gratitude, awe, a strange kind of safety. He had stayed. She whispered it aloud, just to herself, just to the velvet shadows of backstage. He stayed. Meanwhile, out in the crowd, the whispers had evolved into cautious murmurs. A fashion designer leaned toward her publicist. "I thought he wasn't coming this year." "Well?" did the publicist, whispered, eyes fixed on the back of the room. "He just didn't come the way we expected." At the head table, a rising influencer finally put her phone down. She didn't know how to process the moment. She had made a snide comment earlier about him being weird for sitting in the back, but now, seeing the way he carried himself, with so much dignity, so little need for recognition, something shifted in her. Maybe attention wasn't the same as impact. Near the media booth, a veteran journalist scribbled a quick note on her notepad. She had covered celebrities for over 2 decades and had never seen this. A man in the back, saying nothing, doing nothing, yet somehow shifting the entire temperature of the room without a single word. Someone tried to approach Keanu, holding out their phone for a selfie. He smiled gently, shook their hand instead, and declined. Then returned to his stillness. He wasn't rejecting the attention. He simply wasn't hungry for it. The MC, halfway through announcing the next item for auction, faltered. Her eyes caught the movement at the back, where cameras had subtly rotated. She glanced toward the producer's table, uncertain whether to acknowledge what was happening. But even from the stage, she felt it, the gravity shifting. The gala wasn't centered on the spotlight anymore. It was gravitating towards something deeper, something real. A few guests started to rise from their chairs, not to leave, not to approach, just to look, to see. Keanu offered a modest nod, then resumed his seat, almost disappearing behind the floral column again. He had made no speech, worn no medal, signed no autographs. And yet, for the first time that evening, people weren't pretending. An older man near the back, seated at Keanu's table, adjusted the small oxygen tank beside his chair. His eyes were watery. He'd fought in a war long ago, built homes for a living, lost his wife to cancer. No one had asked his name all night, but Keanu had. And now, with all the glittering attention drifting away from the stage toward their quiet corner, he whispered to the woman beside him, "He's the real deal." The janitor, still in his cleanest blue uniform, smiled faintly. He hadn't said much all evening, but he'd seen how Keanu helped the busboy, how he never touched his phone, how he leaned in when others talked. "Hell saw me," he muttered, almost to himself. And perhaps that was it. That was what had everyone stirred. Not just who Keanu was, but how he made others feel seen without needing to be seen himself. At the head table, Ellen DeGeneres finally noticed the shift. Her smile froze. She turned her head, following the subtle change in attention. Then she spotted him. The man seated behind the flowers. The man people were now whispering about, not for what he did tonight, but for what he did. No red carpet, no grand entrance, no curated moment for the cameras. Just presence. Backstage, the violinist was still standing beside the curtain, her violin pressed against her chest. She could hear the murmurs growing louder. Her eyes stayed fixed on that one spot at the back. The man who had calmed her panic. The man who told her that bravery didn't have to be loud. She closed her eyes and smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt proud. Not for playing perfectly, but for showing up, for being vulnerable, for letting the music tremble instead of trying to silence it. Because he had stayed, not just through her song, but in the moment that came after. When applause fades and cameras turn away, that's when you learn who someone really is. And in that ballroom, lit by chandeliers and drowning in luxury, the only thing that truly shone was silence. As the lights dimmed and the last round of applause faded, a gentle hum of conversation resumed across the ballroom. The violinist's haunting solo had left a mark, but the crowd, accustomed to grand gestures, quickly drifted back to champagne and whispered gossip. At the front of the stage, a screen flickered to life with the final fundraising tally. Numbers rolled upward as if in slow motion. The figure crept past the 200,000 mark, then surged past 3. A beat of suspense held the room in collective breath. Suddenly, the counter jumped. $500,000? A single anonymous donation. The ballroom stilled again, but this time with confusion. Murmurs started at one end and flowed across the room like a tide. "Who did that?" someone asked near the front. The MC glanced toward the event organizers, hoping for a cue. None came. The screens displayed nothing more than anonymous $500,000, 0 cents. A socialite in a sequined gown gasped and clapped. "Now that's the kind of generosity I was hoping for," she exclaimed, assuming it came from one of the usual donors. Her friends nodded, eyes scanning the VIP section for a raised hand, a smiling billionaire, a PR moment. But no one stood. No spotlight followed. Backstage, an intern approached the event director. "Should we try to verify the donor for public acknowledgement?" she asked, notebook in hand. The director hesitated, scanning the seating chart. "We'll find out. Someone will want the credit." Only Keanu. He was already slipping out of the back of the room, quiet as he'd arrived, weaving carefully behind the columns and velvet ropes. He hadn't left during the applause. He hadn't left when the cameras turned. He waited until the room forgot him again. A young stagehand spotted him walking down the side hallway and stopped in her tracks. Keanu gave her a small nod. In his hand was a folded check, sealed in a plain white envelope. "For the auction manager?" he said, voice barely above a whisper. The girl blinked, too stunned to ask anything. By the time she looked up again, Keanu was gone. She turned over the envelope. No business card, no branding, just a quiet note scrawled in soft black ink to continue the music. Inside was a personal check, made out to the charity's name. The signature at the bottom didn't boast. It didn't even spell out his full name. Just 3 simple letters. Keanu Reeves. And with that, the biggest donation of the night had passed without a speech, without a spotlight, without even the echo of footsteps. The girl held the envelope to her chest, heart pounding. The envelope remained in the stagehand's grip for several minutes before she finally handed it to the auction manager, her voice still shaky. "Someone asked me to give you this," she said. The manager, a tall man in a crisp tuxedo, peeled open the flap with polite curiosity. As soon as he read the signature, his brow furrowed. He turned the check over, expecting some contact info, some instruction, anything. But there was nothing more. Just the ink, the name, and the amount. He looked up. "Where's the person who gave you this?" The girl glanced toward the hallway. Gone. A pause lingered. Then the manager's face softened. He nodded and placed the check carefully in a locked drawer, like something sacred. He didn't run off to announce it. He didn't take a photo for press. Somehow, instinctively, he understood that the act had not been meant for a headline. In the ballroom, the MC was still speculating. "We'll have to find out which of our generous friends was behind that final donation," she said, smiling at the audience. "Whoever you are, thank you for reminding us what this night is truly about." A spotlight rotated lazily across the crowd, lingering on several faces who smiled, waved, or shifted uncomfortably in their seats, all wondering if they should pretend it was them. Ellen, seated now among the high-profitable guests, smirked and whispered to the woman beside her, "I bet it was Conrad. He loves making a splash." But Conrad shook his head. "Not me." No one stepped up, and slowly the atmosphere changed. It wasn't just the number that stunned them. It was the silence that followed. No one chased the microphone. No one leveraged the moment. It lingered like an invisible ripple through the crowd. Backstage, the violinist was still seated on a folding chair near the side curtain, her violin in her lap, her breath beginning to return to normal. She didn't yet know about the donation. She was still thinking about the man in the back row, the one who had walked her to the wings and told her to play for someone she loved. Her hands trembled less now. Her eyes scanned the corridor, but he was gone. She closed her eyes and tried to recall his words. Not because he was famous, she still hadn't fully realized who he was, but because they had pierced the panic. And out in the ballroom, as applause began again for the next segment of the evening, the donors and celebrities sat up a little straighter. A few of them began to wonder if their laughter and gowns and polished toasts had missed the point. A single action, without noise, had redirected the tone of the night. No one knew who had done it, but they all felt it. By the time dessert was served, gilded plates of crème brûlée with edible gold leaf, conversations had shifted. No one was talking about the yacht package anymore. Whispers of the anonymous donation floated from table to table, chasing curiosity and something deeper. Awe, maybe. Or discomfort. In the far corner of the ballroom, the janitor from Keanu's table quietly finished his food. No one had noticed him, except Keanu. Earlier, they'd shared a short exchange about family and long hours, about cleaning messes left behind by others. Now, the janitor watched the screen where the tally still blinked. The extra $500,000, 0 cents, lingering like a halo over the entire evening. He didn't need to be told who had given it. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a young assistant reviewed security footage, not because she was asked, but because something didn't sit right. She rewound until she spotted the moment. Keanu Reeves, in his simple black suit, quietly sliding an envelope into the hand of the stagehand girl with a soft nod. That was it. No words, no flourish, just a gesture. She sat back in her chair, her eyes were wide. In another hallway, the violinist stood at a mirror, wiping off stage makeup. She heard 2 other performers chatting nearby. "Did you see the final number?" "Yeah. They still don't know who gave it. I heard it was some anonymous exec trying to impress a date." She smiled to herself. She didn't think so. Somewhere, just past the hotel valet lane, Keanu walked alone beneath the streetlights. The air was cool, and traffic had thinned. A valet called out after him, offering to fetch his car, but Keanu just waved gently and kept walking. He passed a couple in a heated whisper fight, paused at the curb while a street musician packed up his case, and helped an elderly woman adjust her coat when it slipped off her shoulders. When the woman thanked him, he simply smiled and said, "Take care." He didn't mention where he'd been. He didn't tell her what he'd done. Inside the gala, the event finally neared its end. One last round of applause, one final toast. But something had changed. For years, these galas were about who wore what, who donated loudest, who gave the best quote to the press. But tonight, the biggest act wasn't captured by a headline. It wasn't tagged on social media. It wouldn't be turned into a viral soundbite. It just was. And for the first time in years, some of the wealthiest people in the room sat with a question they weren't used to asking. When was the last time I gave without needing to be seen? The answer echoed in the absence of a name. And out in the night, Keanu walked quietly down an empty sidewalk, the weight of fame traded, once again, for the softness of anonymity. Backstage buzzed with muted chaos. Crew members adjusted earpieces and moved set pieces. Waiters pushed carts past wires, and amidst the organized mess, a lone reporter spotted him. Tall, calm, unguarded. "Keanu," the actor turned, his expression open yet quietly unreadable. The reporter, a young woman barely older than 25, took a hesitant step forward. "Sorry, I just needed to ask. Why didn't you sit up front with the others?" There was no flash of ego in his eyes, no smirk, no irritation. He just gave a gentle tilt of the head, like he'd been waiting for the question all night. "Sometimes the most important people," Keanu said, "aren't in the front row." The reporter stood frozen for a beat, the answer echoing inside her like it had been meant for something deeper. Before she could thank him, he gave a soft smile, turned, and disappeared around the curtain toward the service hallway. Elsewhere, the ballroom hummed with final applause. The crowd buzzed about the donation, speculating names. Champagne flutes clinked, cameras rolled on Ellen chatting with donors, and celebrities posed in front of branded backdrops. No one realized that the man whose name had been quietly signed on the check had already slipped away. Outside, a cool night wind stirred through the alleyway behind the hotel. A single fluorescent light flickered above the service door. Keanu stepped out into the shadowed space, letting the weight of the night exhale from his chest. It was quieter here, honest. The janitor from his table stood near a dumpster, sipping water from a paper cup. He looked up in surprise. "Hey," Keanu said softly. The janitor blinked. "Oh, Mr. Reeves. Thanks for sitting with me." The man chuckled. "Most people pretend we're not even here." Keanu gave a small nod. "You made the night better. You all did." They stood in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just still. The janitor seemed like he wanted to say more, but instead he smiled. Keanu smiled back. No cameras, no entourage, just two human beings in the alley behind a building full of noise. Then Keanu walked, not toward a limo, but toward a dark sedan parked beside the loading dock. No driver, just keys in his pocket. Inside the ballroom, the violinist peeked out from backstage, still clutching her instrument. She searched the audience, scanning the rows of suited shoulders and sequined gowns. She caught sight of the empty chair at the back. He was gone, but he had stayed long enough to listen, long enough to be seen. She tucked her bow beneath her arm and whispered to no one, "Thank you." Outside, the sedan pulled away without fanfare, just taillights in the dark, fading around the corner. The next morning, the quote hit the internet like lightning. "Sometimes the most important people aren't in the front row." No fanfare, no explanation, just the line, shared by the young reporter who'd caught Keanu's quiet words backstage. She posted it on a small blog entry with a blurry photo of him walking away through a service exit. But something in it struck a nerve. Within an hour, the post had been reshared over 10,000 times. Then 100,000. By noon, it had been translated into 6 languages. Comment sections flooded with people sharing stories of loved ones who had stood quietly behind the scenes. Grandmothers who cooked every holiday meal but were never in photos. Teachers who stayed after school without recognition, janitors who remembered everyone's names, nurses who held dying hands in the middle of the night. It wasn't just a quote. It was a mirror. Meanwhile, Keanu sat at a corner cafe in Silver Lake, a worn paperback open in one hand, coffee cooling beside him. He wasn't scrolling, wasn't watching the storm unfold. He didn't need to. For him, the moment had passed with the same quiet it arrived in. He hadn't spoken to make waves. He had spoken because the question was real, and so was his answer. But back at the hotel, the ripple effects continued. The janitor, who had quietly gone back to work after the gala, found a small envelope taped to his locker. No name on it, just a folded note and a handwritten message. "Your presence matters. Don't let the lights fool you." Inside was a prepaid check for $10,000, 0 cents, from an anonymous donor. He stood there for several minutes, staring at it. He thought of telling someone. Then, he didn't. Instead, he pocketed the note and walked to the break room. There, he gave half the amount to the dishwasher, who covered his shifts when his daughter was sick. No cameras, no quotes, just action. Elsewhere, the violinist received a letter slid under her hotel door that afternoon. No return address, just one sentence inside, handwritten in neat cursive. The world doesn't need perfect, just true. She didn't need to wonder who it was from. She pinned it to the inside cover of her music folder, just above the hospital photo of her brother. The reason she'd almost dropped out. That night she played again, alone in her room, not for a crowd, not for applause, just for him, just for herself. Keanu, meanwhile, never commented, never corrected, never claimed credit. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to be heard. By midnight, social media accounts belonging to celebrities, activists, and everyday people echoed Keanu's words across timeline. Most important people aren't in the front row. But Keanu wasn't watching the reaction. He was sitting in his garden under a string of soft yellow lights, sipping tea and talking with Jake, the young busboy he'd helped during the gala. Jake had shown up after his shift with a backpack full of leftover pastries and a single question. "Why didn't you want the front?" Keanu smiled. "Because I've already lived that life. And I know the best stories are told in the quiet corners." Jake looked down, nodding slowly. "I think I want to be one of those stories." "You already are," Keanu said. The next day, the charity director received another message. It was handwritten on recycled paper, tucked inside an envelope without postage. Inside was a personal donation of another $50,000. No signature, no name. But attached was a note. For the girl who played truth, for the janitor who stood tall, for the boy who didn't drop the tray. This is your standing ovation. The director placed it in a frame, not because it was valuable, but because it was real. The gala was long over. The chandelier still sparkled above the empty tables, but the glamour had thinned. Servers moved silently, sweeping up the remnants of the night. Half-empty champagne flutes, linen napkins with lipstick stains, and broken shards of a serving tray someone had dropped near the west exit. A young waiter named Miguel stood beside the mess, shoulders tight with shame. It had happened fast. He'd turned too quickly, trying to avoid bumping a guest. The tray slipped, shattered on impact. He'd bent to clean it up, but before the manager could arrive with a warning, someone else had. Keanu Reeves. Without a word, Keanu had knelt beside Miguel, picking up glass with careful hands. No cameras, no spotlight, just quiet help. Miguel hadn't said much. He didn't know what to say. The movie star simply nodded at him, handed him a linen napkin for the tiny cut on his hand, and said, "Happens to all of us." Hours later, back in his shared apartment, Miguel posted a single sentence on social media. "Keanu helped me clean up a broken glass tray. No cameras, just kindness." He hit post, didn't think much of it. Then, went to sleep. By morning, everything had changed. Notifications were exploding. The post had been shared thousands of times. Likes climbed by the second. Comments poured in, not just about Keanu's act, but about what it meant. "He's the only celeb I trust." My son watched that and said, "I want to be like him." This is what real class looks like. Not yachts, not suits. This. Miguel scrolled through the messages with wide eyes. It wasn't about the accident anymore. It was about how someone famous, someone revered, chose to be fully present for a moment that most people would walk past. Across the platform, hashtags started trending. Just kindness. Keanu glass tray. Be real men. Help. Quietly. People began sharing their own stories. A teacher in Kansas recalled how Keanu had once paid for her mother's groceries in Los Angeles. A father in Minnesota said his autistic son only responded emotionally to one actor's films, Keanu's. A nurse in Seattle posted about a time Keanu stayed beside a dying man for hours without saying a word, just holding his hand. The story wasn't viral for glamour. It was viral for grace. By the afternoon, media outlets picked up Miguel's post. Headlines started to roll in, but unlike usual entertainment gossip, these weren't dripping in scandal or spectacle. Keanu helps clean glass at gala. No cameras, no fuss. Grace in silence. Keanu Reeves praised for quiet act of kindness. Not all heroes wear capes, some just lend a napkin. It was the kind of coverage most celebrities only dreamed of. Not orchestrated, not publicist approved, just witnessed. And it hit differently. It didn't feel curated. It felt human. Miguel's inbox filled with messages, not just praise, but gratitude. A mother wrote, "I showed this to my daughter who's been bullied at school. She smiled for the first time in weeks." A retired veteran commented, "This reminded me that dignity isn't in rank or uniform, it's in how we treat the unseen." One message simply said, "He reminded me what a man should be." The stories took on a rhythm. People weren't just reacting to Keanu's moment, they were revisiting their own mistakes, regrets, and the rare times someone had shown up without being asked. In a digital world that often rewarded volume, this story rewarded stillness. Keanu, as expected, said nothing. No statement, no post, no comment. He didn't repost Miguel's words, didn't correct or amplify them, and in doing so, his silence echoed louder than any headline. Back at the luxury hotel, the staff whispered about the moment like it was legend. The broken tray had long been swept away, but something lingered. In the break room, a busboy named Jared said he still felt it. "It's like someone actually saw us last night." The head chef, who rarely spoke during service, nodded once. That's the part that stings most, how rare that is. Meanwhile, Miguel was invited to talk shows, podcasts, interviews. He turned them all down. Not out of fear, but because, as he told his roommate, "It wasn't my moment. It was his lesson." People online noticed that too, and they respected it. The trend didn't burn out in hours like most things. It simmered, slow and warm. Unlike a scandal, it grew legs not from outrage but resonance. And everywhere people looked, they weren't asking, "What did Keanu do next?" They were asking something else entirely. "What can I do right now for someone nobody's watching?" A few days later, a second post appeared. Not from Miguel, but from a woman named Dana, who had worked as a dishwasher at the event. She wasn't even in the banquet hall. She'd only heard about what happened from a coworker on break. But her message struck a different chord. "I didn't see him," she wrote, "but I felt it. People came back into the kitchen a little softer. That kind of energy, it's rare, it ripples." Her words were reposted thousands of times, not because they were flashy, but because they reflected a hunger people didn't always admit, the hunger for gentleness, for someone powerful choosing to be kind when no one was watching. Comment after comment rolled in. "This gave me hope today. I've been jaded for years. and this cracked something open. If more men like this existed, maybe the world would breathe easier. But Keanu? He didn't change his routine. He didn't book interviews or issue a polished statement about humility. He simply returned to his quiet life, walking his dog, reading on park benches, tipping his baristas with a smile and no fanfare. The story wasn't meant to last, but it did, because it wasn't about him anymore. It became about us. Teachers shared it with students to spark conversations about character. Fathers showed it to sons as a reminder of strength without aggression. Even CEOs passed it along in company memos, citing it as a model of leadership worth emulating. The image of Keanu crouched beside a broken tray, with no cameras in sight, became symbolic. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't viral in the typical sense. It was steady, unshakable. People didn't remember the designer gowns worn that night, or who won what item in the charity auction. They remembered the man in the back of the room, the one who didn't need to be seen to make an impact. Miguel eventually returned to work as usual, but he kept a photo in his locker, not of Keanu, but of the shattered tray on the floor, captured discreetly just after the moment passed. Below it, he'd written something in black marker. The kindness isn't noise, it's an echo. And the world, for a fleeting moment, quieted enough to hear it. Ellen sat alone in her dressing room long after the lights had dimmed and the audience applause had faded. The laughter from her morning segment still echoed faintly in her ears, but it didn't comfort her like it used to. Something about that night at the gala had followed her home, whispering at the edges of her mind. She had replayed the footage at least a dozen times. Not of her red carpet entrance, not of the interview where she cracked jokes and delivered quips like clockwork, but of the violinist. That girl, barely holding the bow, her fingers trembling, eyes darting across the room until they landed at the back. Her music was haunting, raw, not perfect, but painfully real. It was the only part of the evening that felt unscripted, and behind her, almost hidden in the shadows, sat Keanu Reeves. He hadn't drawn attention, he hadn't waved, he hadn't smiled for the camera. He had simply sat, watched, and stayed. The moment was easy to miss, but now Ellen couldn't stop seeing it. She pulled up the clip again. Her own voice rang out from the stage. "I hope we see some real generosity from those who usually hide in the shadows." The audience had laughed. She had too. But Keanu hadn't. The camera caught his stillness just before the applause. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was something quieter. Something that struck her now more than ever. Disappointment, without condemnation. Ellen leaned back in her chair. For the first time in a long time, she felt exposed. Not by scandal or criticism, but by clarity. By the mirror he had silently held up without ever intending to. She opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Keanu, I think I owe you an apology." She paused. It wasn't just about a poorly timed joke. It wasn't just about failing to see him. It was about the years she had spent performing generosity instead of embodying it. About choosing punchlines over presence. About forgetting that the real magic of kindness is that it often goes unnoticed by everyone except the person who needs it. She deleted the draft, sat in silence, then tried again. This time, Ellen didn't try to be clever. She didn't try to sound enlightened or evolved. She simply typed what was true. "I didn't see you, not because you were hiding, but because I was too busy performing." She stopped again. Her eyes welled with something unfamiliar. Not embarrassment, not guilt, but grief. The grief of realizing how many moments she'd missed. How many people had passed through her life, silently offering something real, and she'd chosen the spotlight over their presence. Her mind drifted back to the early days, long before the fame. Back when her comedy came from a need to connect, not control. when she just wanted to make people feel less alone. There was a letter she once wrote to herself, folded and hidden behind a mirror in her first dressing room. She hadn't thought about it in years. She stood, crossed the room, and opened a drawer that held her keepsakes. Buried beneath a bundle of old cue cards and faded fan mail was a folded piece of notebook paper, creased and yellowing. She unfolded it slowly. It read, "Be funny if it helps, be quiet if it doesn't. Don't forget, the goal isn't applause, it's connection." She closed her eyes. The words hit harder now than they ever had. Outside the window, the city lights flickered. People were probably still tweeting about the gala, about the diamond auction, the dresses, the viral clips. But Ellen wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about a man who chose the last table in the room, who helped a busboy, comforted a young girl, donated $500,000 without saying a word, who left through the service exit without ever asking to be seen. Keanu didn't shame her. He didn't confront her. He simply lived in a way that made the noise of the room feel unnecessary. And that kind of presence, it stayed with you. Ellen opened a new email draft again. This time, she didn't aim to impress. Just truth. She typed slowly. Keanu, I've been in 1,000 rooms filled with applause, and none of them felt as honest as the moment you stood up from that back table. I said something that night about shadows and generosity. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was shining a light. But I was blind to the only real glow in the room. Yours. I saw the video later. The girl with the violin, the janitor, the way you waved without asking for anything back. I realized I've spent too long chasing recognition and not enough time recognizing what matters. You didn't need a front row seat to be present. You didn't need a camera to make an impact. I envy that. I admire it. And I'm learning from it. I'm not ready to perform sincerity. I'm trying to live it. She paused, then added one last line. Thank you for reminding me that silence can speak louder than applause. Her finger hovered over the send button, but she didn't click it. Not yet. Instead, she saved the draft, not as a delay tactic, but as a promise to herself. This wasn't just about Keanu. It was about what came next, about whether she would keep hiding behind applause or start stepping into honesty. She leaned back, tears silently slipping down her face. For once, Ellen didn't reach for a joke. She didn't look for the silver lining or punchline. She just sat there, still, real, listening to the quiet. The letter arrived in a pale blue envelope addressed in loopy, uneven handwriting. It had no return address, just the name Lena written in the corner with a tiny hand-drawn heart beside it. It sat unopened on Keanu's kitchen counter for hours while he watered the garden, fed the stray cat that visited him each morning, and quietly brewed tea in the afternoon sunlight. When he finally opened it, he read every word, slowly. Dear Mr. Reeves, you probably don't remember me. I was the girl with the violin at the charity gala. I didn't speak much. I barely made it through my performance. My name is Lena, and I'm 16. I wanted to tell you something I didn't have the courage to say that night. Before that event, I was planning to quit music. I hadn't told anyone, not even my parents. I've struggled with stage fright my entire life. Every time I get up to play, my hands shake, my chest tightens. I feel like I'm about to disappear. I kept thinking that maybe I wasn't built for this. I was backstage before my performance, and I was crying. I didn't think anyone saw, but then you showed up. Keanu paused. His eyes followed the lines, drawn in pencil and corrected here and there with eraser smudges. Each word felt delicate, like it had cost her something. You told me about your sister, about how she found peace in music even when her body was breaking. And you didn't say it like a celebrity giving advice. You said it like a person who knew what it meant to fight quietly. Then you said, play for someone you love. I'd never played for anyone before, not really. That night, I decided to play for my grandma. She raised me. She's the one who put a violin in my hands when I was 5. She used to sit on the floor during my lessons and clap, even when I played off key. She passed away last year. I never got to perform for her on a real stage, but that night I imagined her in the back row where you were sitting. I played for her, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. You didn't clap the loudest. You didn't stand or shout. But you were the one who made me believe I belonged up there. I could feel it in the way you watched. Like it mattered. Like I mattered. The letter continued with even smaller handwriting, as if Lena had leaned in closer while writing, as though each sentence was a secret she was learning to tell. No, this probably sounds silly. You probably talked to so many people. Maybe I'm just another face in a long day you don't remember. But I remember everything. I remember how you didn't brush past me. You didn't rush to be seen or heard. You stood beside me when I couldn't breathe. You reminded me that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be honest. After the performance, people clapped and I bowed and my knees felt like water. But I looked into the crowd and you were still sitting there. Everyone else had turned away or gone back to talking, but you were watching, still, silently. That moment stayed with me. That night, I went home and practiced again for the first time in weeks. Not because I had a concert or an audition, but because I wanted to feel what I felt when you said, "Play for someone you love." I think that was the first time music felt like home again. I'm writing to you not because I expect a reply. I'm writing because I think maybe there are things we should say to people who change our lives, even if we only met them once. So, thank you. For staying in the back row. For not needing the spotlight to be the light in the room. For being kind when no one was looking. I hope someday I get to play again on a stage where you're somewhere in the crowd. But even if I don't, I'll keep playing. Because of that night. Because of what you gave me. With all my heart. Lena. Keanu sat with the letter for a long time. The light through the kitchen window had shifted, the room now washed in late afternoon gold. He didn't move to write back. He didn't pick up his phone or reach for a keyboard. Instead, he folded the letter in half. Then again, carefully without creasing the corners. He walked to the living room shelf and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal, one he hadn't opened in months. Inside were other letters, some typed, some scribbled, some tear-stained, all from strangers who had found something in his silence. He slid Lena's letter in with the rest and closed the journal slowly, pressing his hand on the cover like a quiet promise. That evening, Keanu stepped out onto his small back patio, journal in hand. The sky was settling into a lavender dusk, and the air smelled faintly of rosemary from the garden. He sat in the old wooden chair near the potted jasmine bush and opened the journal again, letting the pages flutter in the breeze before settling back on Lena's letter. He reread the last line. You didn't clap the loudest, but you were the one who made me believe I belonged. A soft smile formed at the edge of his mouth. It wasn't the kind that reached for validation. It was the kind that came from recognition, of purpose, of connection, of something real in a world often filled with noise. He didn't need to post about it. He didn't need to turn the letter into a speech or a campaign or a caption. He simply closed the journal again and held it in his lap, letting the stillness speak louder than any applause. Somewhere, a violin played faintly from a radio next door. The notes wavered, slightly imperfect, beautifully raw. He listened, eyes closed. He thought of Lena, of her courage, of how the softest voices often carry the deepest truths. He had lived long enough to know that not all moments needed a spotlight. Some moments, like this one, were meant to be protected, not performed. He leaned back, hands behind his head, and looked up at the first stars appearing above the treetops. In the quiet, he felt something settle in his chest. A peace that didn't ask for attention. A joy that asked only to be felt. No reply was needed. No gesture grander than receiving her truth. And so, as the evening darkened and the wind rustled the pages within the journal, Keanu remained where he was. Still, grateful, present. A man who had become the most visible not by demanding to be seen, but by refusing to look away from those the world forgot. The letter would stay with him, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stay. The ballroom looked different this time, not because of the chandeliers or the floral arrangements, but because of the atmosphere. It was quieter, more attentive, the kind of quiet that held reverence, not boredom. Months had passed since the last gala, the one where a violinist's trembling solo had stilled an entire room, and now word had spread that Keanu Reeves would be speaking tonight. People came expecting something powerful. What they didn't expect was how quietly it would arrive. Backstage, organizers adjusted the cue cards and teleprompter. A spotlight tech rehearsed where the light would land when Keanu walked onto the stage. The host cleared his throat and rehearsed the introduction twice. At table 14, near the edge of the room, a young man in a slightly oversized suit sat with trembling hands. His name was Devin, a scholarship recipient from Detroit, first in his family to go to college. He had no idea his name had been specifically mentioned in a handwritten note Keanu had read just a week before, a recommendation from one of Devin's high school teachers. It simply said, he's soft-spoken, but his heart loud. The evening was moving swiftly. Speeches, laughter, video tributes. But most eyes were waiting for the final name on the program. When it came, a hush rolled through the room like a tide pulling back before a wave. And now, the host said, voice reverent, please welcome someone who has redefined what it means to give. The applause was thunderous. People rose. Spotlights lit the stage. But Keanu didn't appear right away. Then, from the far left of the ballroom he emerged, not from backstage, but from between the tables. He walked slowly, wearing the same kind of understated black suit he had worn months ago. No flashy tie, no speech in hand. Instead of heading toward the stage, he paused. He looked out over the crowd. Dozens of faces, all watching, all waiting for a performance. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward table 14. Devin froze. Keanu stopped beside him, smiled, pulled out the chair next to him. Mind if I sit with you? He asked, softly. Devin blinked, mouth half open. Keanu sat down before the boy could finish. At first, no one moved. Then, quietly, respectfully, the entire ballroom stood. Not for a celebrity, but for the choice, for the gesture, for the message. Devin's heart pounded in his chest. He had practiced handshakes, prepared a short thank you if he met a donor, even ironed his shirt twice just to be safe. But he hadn't prepared for this. For Keanu Reeves, one of the most recognized faces in the world, to look him in the eye like they were equals. No cameras, no spotlight, no attention-seeking gesture, just presence. Keanu leaned in slightly, voice low enough not to carry past their table. How's school? Devin swallowed hard, then laughed nervously. Tough, but good. Engineering's no joke. Keanu nodded, genuinely interested. I bet. I hear circuits are brutal. That cracked something. Devin smiled for real this time. Only when I forget the ground wire. Keanu chuckled. Lesson of life, right there. Around them, whispers fluttered. Phones stayed in pockets. It was as if the entire room had silently agreed that this moment belonged to someone else. Not the elite, not the performers, but to a young man with calloused palms from warehouse shifts, who now sat beside someone who chose to lower his voice rather than raise his status. A woman nearby wiped her eyes. A waiter paused mid-step, Even the event photographer hesitated, lens half raised, unsure whether it was appropriate to capture something so personal. On stage, the MC tried to improvise, unsure whether to call Keanu up or let the moment breathe. Keanu never stood. He stayed seated, elbows resting gently on the table, listening intently as Devin shared a story about how he almost didn't apply for the scholarship. "I figured, what's the point? Guys like me don't get picked." "You did," Keanu said. "I still feel like I don't belong." Keanu looked at him. "Belonging isn't about who picked you. It's about what you choose to give back." Devin nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. He glanced around, half expecting the spell to break, but no one interrupted. Someone in the far corner whispered, "This is better than any speech." An older man in a tailored tux leaned forward at his own table and murmured to his wife, "He just redefined the whole night." And yet Keanu didn't seem aware, or if he was, he didn't care. His focus stayed on the person in front of him, one human to another, no platform, no applause cues. When dessert was served, Keanu picked up a spoon and joked, "If this mousse is good, I'll consider coming next year." Devin laughed, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. The kind of laugh that comes not from being impressed, but from feeling seen. When the gala ended, people didn't rush the exits. They lingered, quiet, reflective. Something had shifted in the air. A few guests approached Devon, not Keanu, asking about his studies, shaking his hand. They didn't want autographs, they wanted to know his name. Keanu slipped out through a side door, avoiding the spotlight entirely. No speech, no bow, just a quiet goodbye to the young man he'd chosen to sit beside. The next day, a single photo emerged online, not of Keanu at the podium, but of him seated at the table, head tilted and listening, hands folded, expression soft. The caption read, "He didn't speak for the room. He sat with one." It went viral, not because of celebrity, but because of what it reminded people to be: present, humble, human. And somewhere in a dorm room days later, Devin taped a copy of that photo to his wall, right above his desk, beside a sticky note that read, "Belonging isn't about who picked you. It's about what you choose to give back." It would guide him longer than any award speech ever could. The ballroom shimmered under soft lighting, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. Gone were the dramatic lights and glittering performances from months prior. This gala felt more grounded, more human. Organizers spoke less and listened more. A few tables remained empty, not from absence, but from intentional design. Space had been created for newcomers. People not in suits, people with stories. On a small velvet-covered platform, nestled between the raffle tables and an open bar, sat the final auction item of the evening. It wasn't gold or encrusted with diamonds. It didn't come with a private yacht weekend or a culinary tour of Tuscany. It was a violin. Simple, worn, with a faint scratch near the chin rest and a frayed bowstring tucked beneath it. The auctioneer cleared his throat and spoke with surprising reverence. "Our final piece tonight was played at a gala not long ago. It belonged to a student who almost didn't perform. She credits this moment with changing her life, and tonight, all proceeds from its sale will go to support children's hospice programs in her name." There was no backstory about the violin's brand, no famous maker, no certificate of prestige, just silence. Then a hand went up, not from the front row, not from the loudest table. A teacher who had brought 3 scholarship kids to the event. "5,000, she said. A few heads turned. Then, another voice from the far left. 10. The room didn't buzz with excitement. It held its breath. The bids weren't extravagant, but each one carried weight. A librarian, a retired veteran, a man whose wife had died in hospice 2 years ago. They weren't buying the instrument, they were investing in its meaning. When the final bid landed at $22,000, the room didn't erupt into cheers. It exhaled, gently, like a prayer that had just been answered. Keanu stood near the back wall, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. The girl who had once trembled before her performance was not present. She was attending a recital in Chicago, her first competition since that night. But she'd left the violin behind. Intentionally, her note read, "I don't need it to prove who I am anymore. Maybe it's someone else's turn." After the gavel fell, the auctioneer stepped back, visibly moved. A quiet applause rippled through the room, not for the price, but for the purpose. No camera crews swarmed the winner. No reporters jostled for quotes. The moment lived in the hush, in the way people leaned forward to feel it a little longer. The man who won the bid, Gregory Walsh, stood slowly. He wore a gray suit that had clearly seen better days, but his posture was steady. He held the violin with both hands, like he was receiving a memory. He'd lost his daughter Megan to leukemia 2 years prior. She had been 9, a music lover but too shy to ever perform. Her hospice room had always played soft classical tunes. It helped her sleep. Gregory didn't say anything on stage. He nodded once to the auctioneer, then stepped down and returned to his seat, cradling the violin. Later, when asked quietly by a volunteer why he had bid at all, he simply answered, "Because someone else's courage gave my daughter peace." In the wings, one of the gala staff members approached Keanu with an envelope. It wasn't addressed, no name on the front, just a soft sticker of a sunflower sealing the flap. Inside, there was no letter, just a receipt, proof that Keanu had matched the final donation amount. Another $22,000, 0 cents, quietly contributed. He waved off the need for acknowledgement. "Just make sure it goes to the kids," he said. And that was it. No PR statement, no public post, no selfie with the winner. Keanu didn't stay to shake hands or collect thanks. He waited until the final applause had quieted, then slipped out a side door with his coat slung over one shoulder and his eyes scanning the horizon, as if already looking for the next place where kindness was needed and noise was not. Behind him, the violin was placed back in its case by Gregory, not for resale, not for display, but for travel. "I'll take it to children's centers," he told a volunteer. "They should know what hope sounds like." The story didn't make national headlines, but in a dozen small towns, the sound of that violin would echo softly in hospital corridors and hospice rooms, played by the hands of children who'd never known standing ovations. Only quiet battles. They would play not because they were told to impress, but because someone, somewhere, had shown them they mattered without saying a word. 3 weeks later, in a modest clinic in Montana, the violin was placed gently in the hands of a boy named Eli, 8 years old, stage 4 neuroblastoma, bald, pale, and quiet, but his fingers trembled with excitement. He didn't know who Keanu Reeves was. He didn't know the story of the gala, or the courage it took for a teenage girl to walk on stage and play through her fear. But he knew what music felt like. When he drew the bow across the strings, it wasn't perfect. It squeaked, staggered, then steadied. The nurse recorded a short clip and sent it privately to the original violinist. She opened it late at night, watched Eli close his eyes as he played, and cried into her pillow. No award, no likes, just life continuing in ways no spotlight could follow. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu opened his journal, pulled out her original letter, and added a single line beneath it. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you let others carry forward." And then he closed the book. The email sat in her drafts for days. Ellen had rewritten it 6 times, deleted it twice, and stared at the blinking cursor more times than she could count. The silence that followed the gala lingered with her in a way she didn't expect. She'd built a career on filling space. With jokes, applause, clever comebacks. But now it was the quiet moments that haunted her. The look on the violinist's face, the way Keanu never claimed credit, the sound of her own voice replaying in her head, layered with sarcasm she no longer found funny. She finally opened her laptop one evening, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp. The words came slower than usual, but they came. Honestly. Dear Keanu, I saw you that night. Not with my eyes, obviously. I missed that chance. But I've seen you since. In the stillness. In the way people talk about what you did, without needing to show it. You reminded me that presence is more powerful than performance. I used to believe I needed to be seen. But maybe I just needed to see. She paused. Then she typed the final line. Thank you. I'm still learning. And hit send. The moment she pressed send, Ellen sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. No cameras, no audience. Just her breath, slowing as if she'd finally exhaled a weight she didn't know she'd been carrying. The next morning, she didn't expect anything. Keanu was known for not being reactive, especially to public figures. But sometime around noon, her phone buzzed. It was an email. No subject line, no greeting, just a reply. Thank you. May your next show have fewer lights, but more truth. She stared at the message for a long time. There was no signature, no punctuation flourish, but it hit harder than any standing ovation she'd ever received. Fewer lights, more truth. She read it again, whispering the words like a prayer. In her home office, awards lined the walls. Photos of her with celebrities, magazine covers, viral clip thumbnails. She looked at them differently now. So much of her career had been shaped by the chase for reaction. Laughter, shock, applause. But Keanu's message reminded her that reaction wasn't the same as resonance. That evening, she called her show's producer and asked for a meeting. I want to try something, she said. They were hesitant. Ellen had always been about energy, dance openings, comedy monologues, surprise giveaways. But now she was talking about stripping it all down. What if we just let people talk? She asked. No punchlines, no edits, just truth? The room went quiet. Then, slowly, they nodded. 2 weeks later, a new segment aired. The lights were dimmed, the stage was bare. Ellen sat across from a high school custodian who had worked 30 years without ever being asked how he was doing. They didn't talk about celebrity gossip. They talked about grief, about losing his wife, about raising daughters alone, about silence. The audience didn't erupt. There were no gasps, but the comments section overflowed. I didn't know I needed this. Heme finally feels real. My dad never talked to me like this, but tonight I heard him in that man's story. Ellen didn't respond to those comments. She didn't need to. She just kept showing up. The next morning, she opened Keanu's message again. It wasn't long, but now it felt like a seed that had taken root. She whispered aloud, smiling softly. Fewer lights, more truth. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a performer. She felt like a person. Weeks passed. The new segment, Moments That Matter, became a quiet revolution in daytime TV. Viewers tuned in not for celebrity drama, but for stories they could see themselves in. A man rebuilding life after prison. A mother grieving a child. A girl learning to forgive her father. It was no longer about making headlines. It was about making space. And Ellen, now fully aware of her shift, noticed the way her team changed, too. Writers stopped pushing for viral sound bites. The lighting crew dimmed their sets by instinct. Even the audience seemed to lean in more gently, as if they understood that silence wasn't empty, it was sacred. One afternoon, Ellen stepped outside during a break and sat on a bench by the studio's side lot. A young intern approached her, hesitant. Miss DeGeneres, she began, then paused. I just wanted to say thank you. Ellen looked up. For what? For that second episode, the intern said. The woman who talked about losing her son. I lost my brother last year. That helped me. You helped me. Ellen nodded, moved. Thank you for telling me. The intern smiled, then added, You know, I used to watch your show and wish I could dance with you on stage. Now, I just want to sit and talk like this. That evening, Ellen wrote something in her journal for the first time in months. Helms showed me that it's okay not to perform. She never named Keanu in the journal. She didn't have to. The shift had already taken place in her spirit. She had once thought silence was a void to be filled. Now she understood. It was often the most honest form of connection. Back at home, she made tea and sat by her window. Her dogs lay curled at her feet. There was no laughter track, no cue cards, just the soft hum of night. Her phone buzzed again. A friend had forwarded a clip from a community event in Pasadena. A man in a simple blazer was sitting with a group of high schoolers, listening more than speaking. At first, Ellen didn't recognize him. Then he laughed. A quiet, low laugh, and she smiled. It was Keanu, sitting in the back again. She whispered to herself, still choosing the back of the room. But somehow now, it didn't seem like the back at all. It looked like the center of everything that mattered. The morning sun cut through the trees, casting golden strips across a quiet park just outside the city. It was one of those spring days that felt like a sigh after a long winter. Warm, slow, and filled with unnoticed kindness. A few kids chased pigeons near the benches. A jogger with earbuds passed by, oblivious. And somewhere in the midst of it, Keanu Reeves walked alone. He wore a plain, gray hoodie, worn jeans, and shoes that had seen better days. No entourage, no camera crew, just the soft shuffle of his steps against the gravel path. He paused at the sound of a small child crying. A boy no older than 4 had tripped near the swings. His mother knelt, comforting him, but the boy refused to move. Keanu crouched beside them, not intrusively, not dramatically, just close enough to help. He noticed the boy's untied sneaker and gently tied it, double knotting it with care. Then he stood and gave the mother a small nod before continuing on. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Further along the trail, a homeless veteran sat on a bench. His hands were shaking from the cold, even though the sun had warmed the path. His duffel bag was old and split at the seams. A handwritten cardboard sign leaned against his leg, but the marker had faded. Keanu slowed. He looked the man in the eyes, not past him. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a slim black envelope. He held it for a moment, then handed it to the man without a word. The veteran hesitated, unsure if it was real. When he opened it, there was no cash, just a voucher for a full year of housing through a private sponsor program Keanu had quietly helped fund. At the bottom, in tiny handwriting, it read, "You haven't been forgotten." The man clutched the envelope to his chest. As Keanu moved on, he passed an empty bench beneath a cherry blossom tree. He paused, pulled out a folded note from his pocket, and gently laid it down on the wood. Then he walked away, without looking back. A breeze picked up, catching the edge of the paper. It read, "Character isn't where you sit, it's what you bring to the table no one's looking at." A teenager with a sketch pad approached the bench just moments later. She wasn't looking for inspiration, she just needed a quiet place to sit. Her backpack was heavy with books and worries, and her shoulders slumped from both. She noticed the folded note before she sat down. She read it once, then again, and for a moment her eyes stung. She didn't know who had left it, but it felt like whoever had written those words saw something in her that she had forgotten, something worth holding on to. She pulled out her sketch pad and, for the first time in weeks, began to draw again. Not to impress, not for a grade, just because it felt real. Across the page formed a figure, walking away down a park path. She didn't know his name. She only remembered his stillness. Elsewhere, a young father opened his phone during his lunch break and stumbled across a video. It showed a shaky recording from the gala. A girl playing the violin, a man seated far in the back, watching with quiet pride. The comments were endless, but one stood out. Kindness doesn't clap for itself, it just shows up. The father blinked, then looked across the table at his son, who was picking at a sandwich and frowning. "Hey," he said, nudging the plate closer. "You're doing better than you think." It was a small moment, but it mattered. Across the country, more people saw the image from that night, not of the celebrities at the front, not of the flashing lights or the auction stage, but of a man who sat behind the camera line, beside a janitor, an old woman, and a girl too scared to speak. And later of that same man walking quietly through a park, unnoticed by most, yet changing everything for those who did. The internet buzzed. The video trended. People debated whether Keanu had meant to spark a movement or had simply followed his own quiet code. But the ones who needed it most, the boy with the loose shoelaces, the veteran with shaking hands, the girl with her sketch pad, never posted about him. They didn't need to. They carried it forward in their own way. Weeks later, a local teacher printed out that same photo of the back row table from the gala. She taped it to her classroom wall above the whiteboard, right next to the quote of the week. But she didn't write a quote that day. Instead, she pointed to the image and said to her students, "This is what real presence looks like. It's not about being the loudest in the room, it's about who's listening." The student in the back, one who rarely raised his hand, nodded slowly. That afternoon, he stayed behind to help clean up the classroom. No announcement, no credit. In another part of town, the violinist, now with growing confidence, volunteered to play at a hospice center. When someone asked who inspired her, she just smiled and said, "Someone who didn't need to be noticed to make a difference." The ripple was silent, but powerful. And still, Keanu remained out of the headlines. He didn't release a statement, didn't comment on the donation, didn't confirm the letter. Instead, he returned to his life, quiet, simple, and full of purpose. He walked through another park one morning, nodded to a gardener, petted a limping dog, and paused to help a blind man find his bench. Then he disappeared into the city crowd once more. But the folded note from that first morning remained. Someone had pinned it to a nearby bulletin board, now worn at the edges from people stopping to read it. It said, "Character isn't where you sit. It's what you bring to the table no one's looking at." That phrase traveled across the internet, then into journals, phone lock screens, and coffee shop chalkboards, not because Keanu had asked anyone to share it, but because it was true. And in a world full of noise, sometimes truth is the last voice left, worth listening to. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still thinks kindness needs a spotlight. And tell us in the comments who's the quietest person that's ever changed your life.